Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm going to tell you all about the books that I read in the first half of January, and I guess this is really the 2/3 of the way through the month wrap-up and not the mid-month wrap-up exactly, and that is because by halfway through the month I had only finished reading 3 books, and I felt really stupid about that for some reason. I felt like I really should have 5 or at the very least 4 before I actually decided to do a mid-month wrap-up. So I'm going to get started by telling you about the books that I read during the biannual bibliothon, and the first one and the first book that I finished in 2017 is Phoenix and Ashes by Mercedes Lackey, and this is part of Mercedes Lackey's companion series about elemental masters that takes place in the early 1900s pretty much, and this one takes place during World War I and is a retelling of Cinderella. And so basically in this book we follow a girl named Eleanor who is pretty much imprisoned by her evil stepmother once her father is dead, and then she begins to discover that she has elemental master abilities of the fire variety. So I really enjoyed this book a lot. There were just a couple of little details that sort of went unexplained. There were a couple of things about the ending that seemed a little bit convenient, but other than that, it was really good. I really enjoyed the characters. I particularly thought that the love interest was a really good character. He basically is like this dude who is a pilot and an air elemental master who crashes and hurts his knee, so he basically gets sent home from the war, and then all these girls, including the evil stepsisters, want to marry him because he's like the only guy there, and he's a lord, so he's like really wealthy, but he really only likes Eleanor. Unfortunately, we really didn't get to know the evil stepmother character as much as I would have liked, I think. I feel like in most of the other books of this companion series that I've read, the villain always ends up being like a relative of the main character, so they have like a specific reason for targeting her. But in this one, I really felt like she didn't have a specific reason. Like, the fact that she didn't have a specific reason for targeting Eleanor and her father, who gets killed off and everything, it just weakened the plot a little bit. Like, it weakened her purpose in it. So even though we learn her backstory, like the evil stepmother's backstory, I just still feel like we could have gotten to know her a little bit better. And then there was another thing about, the Phoenix. So obviously this book has a phoenix on it, and it's called Phoenix and Ashes, but the phoenix does not show up until the very last sentence of the epilogue. Like, literally. So basically, I kind of wish that we had gotten to see more of the phoenix in it, because just it is in the title and it's on the cover, so it just made more sense if we had seen it. So, like, there is actually an epic battle where she does get a bunch of elemental creatures to help her fight and everything, and so some of them are like pretty big ones, and I think that honestly one of them should have been the phoenix. Instead of just having the phoenix show up in like the very last sentence of the epilogue and not actually do anything. Overall, I really liked this book. I still think that The Gates of Sleep is my favorite in this series, but this one was really good. Next, I read The Graces by Laura Eve, and unfortunately I was really disappointed in this book, but I'll get to why later. So basically this book is about this girl who moves to a new town, and basically she has this whole backstory of her father just up and disappearing one day, like not even packing a toothbrush or anything. He just is gone one day, like when she wakes up. And so she feels like really depressed about that and all of this stuff, and then basically she wants to be friends with these 3 popular kids who are the Graces. That's their last name. It's Summer Grace and the twins Talia Grace and Fenrin Grace. And so she's really in love with Fenrin for some reason. And then she ends up becoming like best friends with Summer. And so she ends up going over to their house a whole bunch and basically becoming like she basically develops this infatuation with these 3 kids. So they're thought to be witches, and really what that means in this book, of course, is like that their whole family is pagan or Wiccan. I mean, they don't really name it that in the book, but that is what it is, basically. And that's actually one thing that I really appreciated about this book, is that it doesn't really fantasize Wicca or paganism in any way, which, I mean, as a pagan myself, I am so turned off by any book that, that, like, makes paganism into, like, a fantasy thing. And so I really appreciated that this book didn't do that. Because seriously, I have DNF'd books, like, within the first chapter for doing that before. And that was my one thing that really bothered me throughout Buffy the Vampire Slayer as well. Like, they have this whole magic system that is actually supposed to be Wicca, but but they really fantasize it. So I'm like, really? Please stop calling it that. But this book didn't do that. It stayed very true to what Wicca and or paganism is actually like, for the most part, and anything really over the top magical that happens in it is actually not part of that, which is great. Basically, where I found fault with this book was just the first half was really boring, and then the whole second half still just dragged a lot, and I just really found myself not caring at all. And the narrator just really doesn't tell us anything about what's really going on, and so I felt like, what's the point of this story even? And so by the end of the story, I felt like nothing really changed since the beginning of the story, and I just found myself really not caring at all. The next book that I finished was also part of the biannual bibliothon, and that was an audiobook, and that was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. Was that her name? I forget. But anyway, this book is about a girl who, in like the 1800s, she's interested in forensic science, and so she spends all her free time cutting up cadavers with her uncle, and basically ends up dissecting the cadavers of the people who Jack the Ripper has killed, and she basically ends up trying to figure out who Jack the Ripper is and all of this craziness. And so I liked this book, like, okay. I didn't think it was terrible, but I didn't think it was anything super, super special or anything. There were some very weird storytelling decisions that were made in it. So, for instance, I don't think this book really knew how to write a not admitting to herself that she was interested in the love interest. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it didn't really know how to get across the whole thing that she likes him, but she's not admitting it to herself. So basically, in the same sentence, she would say that that she hated him and blah de blah, but then in practically the same breath, she'd say that he was handsome and say that she liked him. So I wasn't really sure for like half the book whether or not she was actually admitting it to herself or not, because it kept contradicting itself. To me, it basically read like, he's a pompous ass, I hate him, but he's so dreamy. And so basically I felt like that was her entire internal monologue. I was like, really? I'm so annoyed by this. I don't know. And then also, there's this weird paragraph that suddenly talks about how her grandmother was from India, so her deceased mother was half Indian, and it literally only mentions this in one paragraph ever throughout the entire story. So even though her deceased mother is a pretty important theme of the book and is brought up all the time, literally, her mother being half Indian only comes up that one time for no reason at all that has anything to do with the plot. So I don't know why that was just randomly in there, and so it kind of bothered me for some reason. And then also towards the beginning of the book, this is the last one, I swear, the last weird storytelling decision that this book made, and that is the fact that basically, at one point, towards the beginning of the book, in like chapter 2 or 3 or something, I swear, she basically is wandering around by herself at night, and she gets grabbed from behind. And there's all this build up to like, oh no, who's grabbing me from behind? I recognized his voice, but I couldn't tell who it was. I couldn't place who it might be, blah de blah de blah. And there's all this build up, like seriously a buttload of build up. But honestly, we already know who it is because only like 3 characters have been introduced so far by that point. So that like really bothered me as well. But overall though, and also the ending, I didn't find it super predictable or anything, but I did find it to be a little bit disappointing. Like, basically, I felt like the motives of Jack the Ripper that we learn at the end just didn't make a whole lot of sense, and that kind of took away from the story a little bit. But I still liked this book enough that I would definitely want to read the second one when it comes out. The next book that I read was also an audiobook, and that was A Natural History of Dragons, which is the first book in the Lady Trent series, and I'm really glad that I finally read this because I really enjoyed it, and I just had so much fun reading about Lady Trent. She's just such a badass scientist lady, like, and I also like how she rebels against sort of the woman's place in society in that time period, but it's like not in the typical way. So instead of being like, I don't want to get married, like she kind of goes like, well, if I have to get married, I'd better find somebody who likes dragons as much as me, and all this stuff, like, instead. So that was just really interesting to read about. I felt like it made it really original. One weird thing though is that that took a little bit of getting used to is the fact that even though this is a book that seemingly takes place in the real world in like the 1800s or so, the places, the place names and names of any landmarks are fantasy names. So, like, instead of, say, England, we have Scareland and all this other stuff. So that took a little bit of getting used to, because it confused me a little bit at first. But honestly, once you get used to that, it's not that weird. Also, I think that's really weird that every single book, all of those books take place in England, and 3 out of the 4 of those take place in like olden day England. So this was apparently the month of like reading books that set in England. I don't know why. Finally, the last book that I finished in the first half of the month, or first 2/3 of the month rather, is Homegoing by Yagyasi, and this is obviously a book that many of you are probably familiar with, but if you're not, this book is about, basically it starts with 2 half-sisters who have never met or anything, and the different lives that they lead. Like, one of them gets sold into slavery and the other one marries a British man, and then it follows their descendants. Like, each chapter is a different one of their descendants and where each of their descendants end up, and it is so interesting and just mind-blowingly good, and I highly, highly recommend this book. Here's iPod. She's been sitting on my lap this entire time, and since I think you guys haven't seen her in a while, here she is to say hello, and I think she just wants me to put her back down. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite book is that you read so far this month, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye!